Welcome to the next OpenUK Future Leaders training session. Please note this meeting is being recorded and will be available soon afterwards in our YouTube channel. First, a little about the OpenUK Future Leaders Group. The Future Leaders Group is a collection of individuals who are interested in open technologies, including open source software, open hardware, and open data. It includes a wide range of people that work in technology, intellectual property, outsourcing, procurement, data, coding, and innovation, as well as private practice lawyers and in-house counsel that work in the technology sector and related fields. It operates under the direction of the OpenUK Legal and Policy Committee and has a clear purpose to bring together and develop future leaders in legal and policy matters relating to open technologies and to support and further the mission of the Legal and Policy Committee. The Future Leaders Group is currently co-chaired by me, Robert Grinnells, and I'm from Phil Fisher, and Katie Gibson from Bristow's, and we're both lawyers advising on technology and commercial matters. The group is always open to new ideas and to new members, whether getting involved in all of our activities or just dipping in and out of our various projects, so feel free to get in contact if you'd like to get involved. And for today's session, I'm privileged to say we're joined by Mike Milinkovich. Mike has been the Executive Director of the Eclipse Foundation since the position's creation in 2004 and has been involved in the software industry for over 30 years in a variety of leadership roles, including software engineering, product management, business development, and IP licensing. Mike also wears a few other hats as Director of the Open Source Initiative and as a member of the Java Community Process Executive Committee. He's a passionate believer in open source as the best way to innovate and collaborate, and he also considers himself the Eclipse community's chief cheerleader, so look out for some pom-poms today. We'll have a chance for any questions at the end, so please pop them in the chat, and we'll invite you onto voice and video to ask them yourself if you'd like to. Mike, welcome to our session today, and thank you for joining us, and over to you to talk about reinventing the Eclipse Foundation.
Thanks, Robert. Great introduction. Appreciate it. Let me see. Okay, hopefully that's my slides coming up. Does that look okay? Alrighty.
All good. Thanks, Mike.
All right, so let's dive into this. Again, thank you so much for the opportunity, and I look forward to having a chat about what we're doing with the Eclipse Foundation, where we have been in the past, and where we are taking this in the future. And so I just want to start off a little bit about the Eclipse Foundation itself, what it is, who we are, and I'll state my explicit goal here. There is a sort of a general perception out there. Oh yeah, the Eclipse guys, they do an IDE, as that's that's the mental picture still to this day of many people when it comes to the Eclipse Foundation. And in fact, we do many more things than the IDE. But just going through the history, the kind of where it got us here. The original Eclipse project was an IDE that was released back in 2001 by IBM, and the goal was to create a tooling ecosystem for Java developers. That was the original goal, but they realized that they weren't achieving their goals because their direct competitors, wanted to have vendor-neutral governance, and that really spurred the creation of the Eclipse Foundation back in 2004. And I came on board as the executive director at that time, and as you'll see later, about 2/3 of the people who work at the Eclipse Foundation work in Ottawa, Canada. And why the heck would you have an open source foundation in Ottawa, Canada? And there's like two elements to that. One is that's where the original core team of developers that worked on the Eclipse IDE were. It just so happened that that's where the IBMers who built it, their particular lab. And the second was they hired me for the job, and I wasn't moving, so I grew the staff kind of around me. But our first European staff members was back in 2006, and I'll sort of pick up the pace here because I don't want to go through the whole thing. And then we ended up creating the Eclipse Foundation Europe GmbH in 2013. In 2015, we started getting very active in EU research programs, and we've been involved in 14 different research projects since then. Particularly things like Horizon 2020 program, ITEA 2, ITEA 3. So we have been involved in these kinds of programs for a number of years. Then I think a pretty big event in our history was back in 2017, Oracle announced that they were going to move Java EE to the Eclipse Foundation, and it was eventually rebranded as Jakarta EE. And so what happened as part of that is the Eclipse Foundation is now a open specification organization as well as an open source organization, because we had to replace the specification process of the JCP as part of what we're doing at the Eclipse Foundation. Then in 2020, we announced our move to Europe and the creation of the Eclipse Foundation AISBL. And then since then, Adopt OpenJDK and OSGI have announced their moves to the Eclipse Foundation. And so we're seeing continued growth in technology areas. So when we look at what it is that we are and what it is that we want to do, our vision is to be the leading community for individuals and organizations to collaborate on commercially friendly open source. There's actually a lot to parse there, but the first part of it is that really we really focus on the idea that the governance models that we want to provide for our members, but particularly our open source projects. We want to basically calibrate them to provide a place where an individual who has no corporate affiliation whatsoever can feel an equal and empowered to participate on a team where there could be developers from some of the biggest companies in the world, and creating that level playing field where everybody feels welcome is important to us. And then on the output side, it is important to us that the software that we build at the Eclipse Foundation is ready for commercial adoption and use. So this is there's all different ways you can think about open source and the technology that it provides, but that's definitely one of the things that we think about quite a bit. And in terms of our mission is, and this is kind of an interesting duality. So, I, as the executive director, and our staff, we are focusing on advancing two things simultaneously. And so those two things are our open source projects, raising awareness of them, helping them, move them along, cultivating their communities. But at the same time, thinking about, okay, how can this technology be commercialized, and how can we build a sustainable business ecosystem around the technologies that are coming from Eclipse? And that dual nature of being focused on both our open source projects and our business ecosystems has definitely been a source of, I think, strength and resiliency for the Eclipse Foundation over its 16-year history. By the numbers, we're probably bigger than you thought we were. So we have over 375 projects, over 333 members, over 1,600 committers working on our projects. So we have over 240 million lines of code. I'm pretty sure that's over 250 at this point. Excuse me, and which represents, conservatively estimated, as about 13 billion euros of value in shared investment and growing value. So we are definitely one of the largest open source organizations out there, and certainly in terms of the amount of code that we're providing to be used. And again, always under commercially friendly terms. That's a big asset for people to pick up and use as they need in their business. And we manage all of this with about 35 staff members, and we'll talk a little bit more about working groups as we go along. These are the logos of the industry leaders on our board. And I just wanted to call out that there's a very strong representation from Europe on our board. And sort of in terms of story of, part of the reason why Amanda invited me to this is, the Eclipse Foundation is moving to Europe. And we'll talk about that a little bit more about that in a moment. And, the story of why we're moving to Europe really goes back to just a little bit over a year ago now, where at a board meeting, we were talking through some strategy, and one of our directors from Bosch in particular, said, the Eclipse Foundation seems to be doing really well in Europe. Go off and sort of analyze how well we're doing in Europe, and see what you can do to do even better in Europe in terms of raising the profile, expanding, attracting more members and more projects. And we'll loop back to that in a second. In terms of the kinds of things that we do at Eclipse, one of the things that's somewhat unique is that we effectively ship products. So if you look at the Eclipse simultaneous release of the Eclipse IDE. It has shipped. It's for many years it was done annually. More recently, it's been done quarterly. But we have now over 15 years of history of shipping annual releases and quarterly releases of the Eclipse IDE on time to the day. And the reason why I think this is interesting to call out is that the predictability arises from a maturity of process and a maturity of community that is somewhat unique amongst open source organizations. And we're not talking about small projects here. We're talking about releases that embody 75 million, in some cases now more recently 80 million lines of code with hundreds of people working on these releases. And to be able to do this repeatedly, always hitting exactly the same date, is definitely a testament to the maturity of process and the ability of our community to hit these dates. And which really brings us to the community is the capacity, and how we see the role of the Eclipse Foundation is very much that we need to be the facilitators, right? So if you have anytime where the Eclipse Foundation is at the center of something, then we're also potentially the logjam, because the community as it grows can get so much more done than we can control, even attempt to control by the staff with the. And so the community is the capacity, and as we have been growing, it's really only been a couple of years ago that our committer population was around 1,000, and so we've seen dramatic growth over the last 3 years. Our contributions, where do they come from? And so if I remember, I said earlier that we aspire to being a open source community where individuals can join, and then people from some of the largest companies can participate. And this chart really shows how successful we've been with that. So just right around half of the contributors of our projects, or the contributors to our projects, are individuals, independents, folks that are, one way or another doing it either for the joy or in support of a small consulting firm or whatever. But it's very much they're not aligned with some big company or certainly a member company. But then if you look at the contributions that are coming in from companies, you also see some of the largest names on the planet there, right? Like companies like IBM, Ericsson, Red Hat, Robert Bosch, and SAP are all very active in the Eclipse open source community and are also making contributions. So in terms of what we do at the Eclipse Foundation, the 4 key elements is we provide the infrastructure for supporting collaborative development. We do a lot of process and governance to help wrap that infrastructure with well thought out processes to facilitate collaboration. Many cases we're talking about collaboration amongst direct competitors in the marketplace. And so, how do decisions happen in a vendor neutral way and so on is very much part of the value that we bring. We invest a lot in community development, developer advocacy, raising awareness of the projects and so on. And then finally, I've said this a few times, we position ourselves or think of ourselves as wanting to deliver commercially friendly code. And it's not just about the licensing, it's about doing proper IP management as well, with so to make sure that the companies that are consuming code from the Eclipse Foundation and putting that code into projects have the comfort that they can do so safely. And so we invest probably more than any other open source foundation in doing IP management and making sure that all of the licensing of all of the components is done with compatible licenses, and that we can produce a bill of materials and demonstrate that we know where all that code came from and the licenses under which they are being distributed. So working groups is really the mechanism that we've been using now for starting about a decade ago to align members and projects in particular technology domains. So we have, just I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but just to call out a couple of areas of particular strength. Jakarta EE is now the successor to Java EE. We're talking about a multi-billion-dollar, 20-year-old ecosystem for doing all things big Java. So enterprise Java, what used to be called enterprise Java, now sometimes referred to as cloud native Java. But Jakarta EE is a very large deal, and is not only is it shipping open source code, it is a well thought out, modern, royalty-free specification process as well. And so I think that's it's been a real tribute to the staff of the Eclipse Foundation that we've gone from not having a spec process to having a world-leading spec process in just a couple of years. Edge native and IoT are two areas where we think we have some of the coolest technology going. So if you are looking for open source technologies in those spaces, by all means, please keep us in mind. But with 375 projects, and we're actually up to 15 different working groups, it's hard. You can't focus on everything. So just kind of share where we, the staff at the Eclipse Foundation, spend our time or spend our focus. It's not like we won't help the other projects, but these are the four main areas that we focus our attention to, because honestly, as I'm sure you're aware, if you try to focus on 375 things, you'll focus on nothing. So cloud native Java is one. That's comprised of Jakarta, and there's also a microprofile specification process, but then there's projects like Jetty and Vertex, OpenJ9 and the likes that are focusing on cloud native Java. And Adopt OpenJDK moving to the Eclipse Foundation is another example of that. IoT and Edge, I just mentioned a moment ago, we think we are by far and away the open source center of gravity for IoT technologies. And we have some of the, we think, absolutely leading edge technologies that are available in open source in terms of completion of vision and readiness to be put into commercial products. Automotive is another key area. Our interest in automotive is not really about, like we don't feel like we compete with automotive grade Linux, for example. We're not really interested in putting software in the car. It's mostly about the things that are surrounding the car through the connected car scenarios. And also a lot of stuff that we do is related to simulation with a specific emphasis on providing simulations that can be used to test autonomous driving systems. And so we have a great interest in how do we produce safe and verifiable autonomous driving systems for the automotive sector. And then finally, our roots are in tools, the venerable Eclipse IDE, but we are also building out an entirely new, all new code tooling platform for the next generation of developers with projects like Eclipse Thea and Eclipse Che that are providing a whole new next generation tooling platform for developers. All right, so why the heck is the Eclipse Foundation moving to Europe? If we seem, there's lots going on, things seem to be busy. Why are we doing this? So it goes, we're going to go through a couple of different layers of explanation here, but if you go back to ground zero, open source has won. It's the advantages to open source are absolutely clear to industry, and in particular, you think about it, the entire software sector of the economy has embraced open source. I mean, look at, Microsoft was, for many years was kind of held out as the anti-open source proprietary software vendor, and just look at them now with GitHub and the market segment they've got with VS Code now. So there's they have totally embraced open source, and we really think that open source is the mechanism that is driving a very large percentage of innovation around the world. The kind of collaboration, the open licensing, the ability to form coalitions without violating antitrust regulations, these kinds of things that are provided by open source foundations and open source organizations is playing an absolutely key role in innovation in every sector of the economy. And so I love this quote from a former board member of the Eclipse Foundation, Tyler Jewell. Open source is now the foundation and bedrock of nearly all software, whether running cloud, proprietary software packages, or enterprise system. The world is now built with and upon open source. There will be no going back. It's a great quote, and I actually, very much believe it to be true. So I think that it's really important to understand that open source has gone from being, a merry band of revolutionaries to not only mainstream, but one of the main engines of modern society, and in all facets. And as a result of that, participation is absolutely surging. And I really think that the next wave of participation, basically everybody that's in the software industry, in the technology industry, is very much they're already deeply into open source. The next question then becomes what's the next wave, and we really think a lot of it's going to be coming from enterprises. So the next wave of open source participation is coming from industrials, the banking sector, logistics, finance, insurance. That's where the next wave of participation is coming. Now, in terms of where all this impacts Europe, I'm sure many of you seen this slide before. Is if the greatest pieces of wealth that are being developed these days are coming from what's been dubbed the platform economy. So the companies like Amazon, Microsoft, Google, Facebook that are providing social platforms, but also computing and cloud platforms. These are really driving the wealth creation around the world, and Europe's share of this new platform economy has been absolutely dwarfed by the success of American companies and Chinese companies. And really, so one of the things that there's a lot of concern about is, okay, so how do we Europeans, how do we do better in the next round as the next crank of the innovation engine happens? How can Europe do better? And so one of the things I'd like to point out is that if you think about what is a common theme amongst all of the companies, especially the big bubbles that are shown on that slide, and correlation is not necessarily causation, but it's a really good place to start looking. All of those companies have become masters of adopting open source in their product strategies, and where it is appropriate for their business, contributing back to the communities, and in some cases creating their own communities. But the interaction of the broad open source developer community and through open source and their product strategies has been a very, very key part of the success of all of these companies. And so I would argue that for Europe to become successful, digitalization of their industries is of course key. But I don't feel that any company can claim to have, completed the digitalization journey until they've mastered open source. And the reason why that's true is that open source is you have to master open source before you can claim to have mastered software. And ultimately, in my view, what digitalization actually means is becoming a software-centric organization. And so a big part of why we're moving to Europe is we see an opportunity to help Europe do better in this new platform economy. So, and around the same time that we were doing the analysis of how we as the Eclipse Foundation are doing in Europe, there was a number of announcements that were made around data sovereignty, digital sovereignty, cloud independence, the sovereign cloud stack, GDPR, of course, and coming up with a European approach to ethical AI. All of these initiatives have been announced through the European Commission over the last year and a half. They all need to have open source as a very core part of these strategies if they have a hope to be successful. So we think that there's a need for international collaboration and innovation through open source, and this is no longer a nice to have, it is a must have. Collaboration takes place around the globe across all time zones, all languages, all cultures via the open source mechanisms, and that is the source of much of what is happening in the economy. So there's a need for international collaboration, and we think Europe is a great place to do that. For Europe, digital capabilities, competitive and independence are imperative, and in truth, helping establish a more of a platform economy in Europe is also very important. And so we came to the conclusion that for Europe to achieve the goal that it has set out for itself, it requires an open source foundation with an international reach and reputation. Interestingly enough, we realized at around the same time that we actually already were the largest open source organization in Europe. So about 2/3 of our paying members, about 2/3 of our developer population are based in Europe. So we had gradually over time become a very European-centric organization. And we'd also been operating an entity in Europe for over 7 years. So we had a lot of experience operating in Europe, and we have a 1/3 of our staff in Europe. So, to summarize why we're moving to Europe, 70% of our paying members are there, 70% of our committers there, 1/3 of our staff is there, and we certainly intend to grow there. We already were the largest open source foundation in Europe. We've been operating in Europe. We've got a lot of success with our research programs and through interacting with the European Commission as a result of that. And Europe needs an open source foundation of international reach and reputation, and by becoming that organization, we feel the Eclipse Foundation can increase its global impact. And one thing I want to stress and add about this is, as we've gone through this journey of moving to Europe, it's been backed, every vote at the board level has been backed unanimously by all of the strategic members of the foundation. So it's not just the European companies that are on our board that are voting in favor of this transition. It's IBM and Oracle and Red Hat, Fujitsu and Huawei, and so all of these companies are supportive of this transition. All right, so that's why we're moving. How does this actually work? So actually, I need to update the title to Eclipse Foundation yesterday. We used to run as a Eclipse.org Foundation. We are Delaware Incorporated 501c6, which is American tax code for a trade association. And we actually we only have one person actually physically in the U.S. The 2/3 of our employees are in Canada, and we operated that as a Canadian branch operation of a U.S. company. As I mentioned, 7 years ago, we created a European subsidiary. After a bunch of analysis, it turned out to be a lot easier to do that as a for-profit, a wholly owned for-profit, and largely because one of their main tasks was to run events, which is basically something that you can't do if you're a nonprofit in Germany, or it's certainly much more difficult to do. So it just made good sense. Where are we getting to? So the Eclipse.org Foundation that's the U.S. entity, and we're creating the Eclipse Foundation AISBL, and we will eventually move the GmbH over under the AISBL. We also carved out the Canadian operations and created a Eclipse Foundation Canada, and turns out that nonprofit law in Canada is pretty straightforward. If you can create any entity for a purpose other than profit, and it's a nonprofit. So we created the Eclipse Foundation Canada. Its sole role is to provide services to other open source foundations on a nonprofit basis. So basically, we're the operating arm of the Belgian and U.S. foundations, and are through its board and its membership, it's entirely controlled by those two entities. So ultimately, we're going to be moving all of our membership over to Belgium, and then it will continue to fund the operations in Canada. We also took this opportunity to kind of fix up our membership levels. So we collapsed 2 levels of strategic membership into one. We removed enterprise because honestly we weren't getting very many of them. Rebranded solutions to contributing. So we've reduced was it 6 classes of members to 4 classes of members, and of course moved all of our due structures into euros. The timeline has been busy, so we've been at this for quite some time. As you can imagine, a lot of work goes into each one of these. But we filed our incorporation in Belgium in August, and at the same time, we also had completely redrafted our bylaws and membership agreement in the U.S. To help support this transition, and we needed to have a vote of the membership of our existing U.S. organization to move this forward. All that was done by October, so effective October 1st. We have new bylaws and membership agreements in effect in the U.S. So we filed in Belgium in August. By late October, all of the sort of bureaucratic process has been completed and passed successfully, and the file was then handed off to the ministry for signing. And oh boy, slight mistake on that slide. And we're still waiting for the royal decree. So as of this moment, and darn, this is sorry, with that arrow is in completely the wrong place. Not sure what happened there, but the Eclipse Foundation Europe GmbH is still a subsidiary of Eclipse.org Foundation in the U.S. Which is up and running in existence. Eclipse Foundation is up and running in existence, and I and all the employees in Canada are now getting paychecks from Eclipse Foundation Canada. But the Belgian organization remains in limbo because we are waiting for what's called the Royal Decree, which is the incorporation documents for a nonprofit in Belgium. And unfortunately, due to the high rate of COVID in Belgium, so the government is sort of focused elsewhere. It's all of the royal decrees for the various applications for incorporation are stuck, and so we don't know when we're going to get this. We were originally expecting to get it in October, and here we are almost at the end of December, or well into December, and still waiting. So what are we going to do once we are European? So our goal is to create a European organization. We will be legally based in Brussels, and we do plan to grow a small office there over time. And we aim to grow the Eclipse global ecosystem by advancing strategic open source projects with international impact. And of course, we're very focused on these days on talking with many of the European companies and organizations. For example, Gaia X is one initiative that's out there that's looking for a partner for open source activities, and so that's one organization that we're talking to, and it's really about strategic open source projects with international impact. And one of the reasons why we think, I mentioned earlier that part of our success has been this model of being both focused on the open source projects, building a good open source community, being a leading community for individuals as well as organizations to collaborate, and fostering a commercial ecosystem. That dual nature has done us well. And so that's really the kind of model that we want to bring to Europe, because we think it's what we really think we can help European industry with their journey to digitalization, and also becoming more attuned to new models of open collaborative innovation. If you want to think about how we see how we think of ourselves relative to the other organizations that are out there, we think of ourselves as one that has both a community of practice, the way the Apache Software Foundation has, in terms of we're strongly opinionated on what a well-run open source project looks like. But we also have full-time professional staff and offer a wide breadth of professional services. So the way that we think of ourselves is we have the professionalism of the Linux Foundation, but the community of practice similar to the Apache Software Foundation. And it's the combination of those two things that really helps us facilitate this open governance for anybody from an individual to some of the largest corporations in the world. And some of the business benefits of open source that we want to bring to Europe are things like better decisions in terms of, seeing technology that's being adopted through open source is a great way to sort of predict the future. And so having transparent access to open source communities and the decisions that are being made there is a great way to predict where technology is heading. And there's that famous line that the best way to understand the future is to create it. That has never been more true than in open source. Faster innovation, we've talked a lot about this already. I really do think that innovation happens faster because there's the innovation that happens in open source, but also the innovation that happens because of open source. So many applications, internal enterprise applications, and software products or technology products are built today by assembling open source components that basically comprise 80% of the application or product, and then you can innovate on top of that platform. And that's really what's driving the breathtaking pace of innovation that's happening in software. Open source has been shown to be more secure. It's definitely more flexible because the ability to change the code is inherent in what open source. So by turning your software from a black box to an open box definitely helps change the dynamic you have with your software vendors, and also the ability to customize software for your own unique business needs. Transparency is very important. And again, this is a business benefit in the sense that it allows businesses to understand where this technology is going, full disclosure on the capabilities, just not only capabilities today, but in the future. So transparency is absolutely key for doing product planning, and again, picking up the pace of innovation and driving things to market more quickly. Diversity is a core value of the Eclipse Foundation. And being an open source community, an open source community, brings diversity and inclusiveness, and this really helps build a sense of community around the code, and that community and that sense of community helps make the code both better and more sustainable. Everybody wants to attract the best talent, and open source is both a way to find good talent, but it's also a very important way to retain good talent. By supporting your developers' activities in open source communities has been shown repeatedly as one of the ways that the best organizations can attract and retain talent. And then finally, social responsibility is a very important thing these days, and are achieving greater focus all the time. And active participation in open source is definitely one way that a corporation that has valid business objectives can also be shown to be a responsible citizen in our society. So all of which is to say, part of this is reminding companies that yes, open source is free, but in some ways it's free just like puppies. And what I mean by that is it's free, but it does require care, feeding, nurturing, training, and all of the other things that goes with getting free puppies. And an organization like the Eclipse Foundation is the perfect place to come and help make open source more sustainable. So with that, I thank you for your time and attention, and I look forward to answering any questions.
Thank you so much, Mike. That was a great final slide as well. If we just open it up to the floor and if anyone's got any questions.
It's really fascinating. And going back to your slide where you had the list of companies and the VCs, you were saying something that I and a number of other speakers this year have said to the group around the digitization of companies and how not only is every company becoming a software company through that, they may not fully understand they're becoming an open source company. It's a sort of inevitability for them. And I was really interested in the companies that you put up in that slide, because some of them are ones which I hadn't realized were working in open. I think Klarna, who do payments, and HelloFresh, were they on there? I think that was it. So companies that we would recognize as fairly entrepreneurial young companies in the UK. I don't know if they are British or European. And I was just wondering where you've got those.
Which slide you
So
were
there's a
thinking?
slide with some lozenges for the US, for Europe, and for Asia, with a number of different companies listed as well as the ones.
That's the, yeah, hang on a second. Let me share that slide.
Yeah, it was really interesting.
So it's that slide is what it's showing is
Yeah, okay.
so what this slide is showing is this is a work that's done by a professor in Germany, basically mapping the economic value of the companies in the platform economy by geography. And really, what this slide is illustrating is that Europe is not doing well in the new platform economy, and I think and so the companies that are listed here are not necessarily companies that are not every company here is invested heavily in open source, although there's almost no software-centric organization on the planet that isn't consuming open source, because anybody who tries to write their own, their entire own stack these days that's going to end badly, right? Everybody is relying on open source components as the way to get started with your stack. So it's not so much that everybody on this slide is involved in open source. This slide is really talking about the companies that are doing well in the platform economy. But the point I made on this slide is if you look at all of the really big bubbles, every one of those companies is deeply engaged in productizing open source at a minimum. Right, like Samsung, a huge amount of their value comes from Android. Alibaba, they run their data centers on OpenJDK Java. Right, there's like every single one of these, their platform that they are commercializing to a large degree is based on open source.
It's really interesting to me in particular because we are working on a report looking at these questions, and I didn't know this piece of work existed. So was this done for you?
No, this is public stuff. I'll
it's interesting.
Pop an email out of band and I'll get you the links. He does this. He's been cranking this study out every year for the last couple of years. I think this is the 2019 version.
Okay.
So the size of the bubbles change based on their current stock value, but it's definitely I think it's definitely eye-opening. If you are a European and interested in the future wealth of Europe, this slide should scare the bejesus out of you.
Yeah,
it's not a good look, right?
No, Mike,
Right.
for us, I'd love to see if he's got it so we can actually take it a step further and perhaps, having done this slide, go to the next stage and look at the UK and Europe, because we're seeing Europe, as you know, moving to having a really clear open source strategy, whereas the UK's is something that many of us contributed to 10 years ago, before the platform economy was really what it is. So we've got a lot of work to do. Hopefully post-Brexit, we've got a lot of work to do with the UK government, and I'd love to see this. So I will contact you and Holger Schmidt. Thank you.
Yep. Happy to help.
Say any more questions, but I'll jump off.
I've got sort of a question / comment. I think it's interesting how you're saying Samsung derives so much of its revenue and profits from Android, and like Eclipse is the Eclipse IDE, of course, was the kind of chosen child for Android development for a long time. So that's kind of where I first heard about Eclipse. I'll be honest here, I hadn't realized the enormous breadth of things that you cover, and the amount of sort of the Java EE turning into Jakarta EE. I hadn't quite realized some of that kind of history and how things have changed and stuff. So it's really interesting hearing all of this, and it's really opened my eyes as to kind of quite how much Eclipse does. And I think it's a very interesting comment you made about you're very commercially friendly, and so you're really focused on that commercial friendliness of open source. I think it's something that I think a lot of businesses, I think unfairly, are scared of using open source sometimes. But I think helping that conversation move forwards, and also coming at it going, look, it's here to be commercially used. Let's show you how it can be used. It's a really important thing to have there. So yeah, you must be doing a great job on it. So.
Yeah, well, but I think this perception that open source is scary to use, right? I'll be blunt. Yeah, get over yourselves.
Yeah.
Right. And I have this Monty Python was a major feature of my life growing up. And I wish I had the courage to do a talk one time about how lawyers are killing technology, where and the song in the background needs to be "Every Sperm is Sacred," and it's because it's like IP lawyers are trained that every little bit of IP that could be the one that is invaluable to the company, and it must be saved and it must be preserved and protected, right? And the simple fact of the matter is every software developer on the planet knows that 99% of all software ever written is just junk. It's a rapidly depreciating asset at best, and it within typically a couple of years at most, it crosses the line from a rapidly depreciating asset to a outright liability. And the way that the business model of open source is it moves that outright liability into something that's a different group of people is responsible for maintaining, or at least a collaboration where you are only maintaining, investing a relatively small portion to maintain it. So honestly, the lawyers really need to get over themselves. That view of open source is going to kill their client's business. Dead. And
I think it's very true. I think having dealt with lawyers who really don't understand it, I think it is a real thing. I think you see a shift. I think as younger people come through, that they understand it because they've grown up with it and they've realised that it is this kind of building on the shoulders of giants sort of thing, and that kind of style. There's still plenty of lawyers I think who don't get it, but I hope I'm slightly.
It's not just ageism. I've met a few older lawyers that get it too. It's
true.
It really is. I think it's partially is you need to go back to right back to the schools and how they're how IP law is taught, right? And I think lawyers forget that they're there to support the business, right? And if you support the business by avoiding risk to the point where the business goes out of business, I think as a lawyer you suck. I'm sorry, you just do. They really need to get over themselves, and they really need to understand that open source is the mechanism by which their company can become much more successful.
No, I think that's very true, and I think the whole point of that commercial hat, not enough lawyers are happy to wear it. And I think the thing you said about moving from an asset to a liability, it moves very quickly, and you then get to push that liability to someone else, isn't something I quite realize, but it's so true, and it's a really important point to kind of make sure everybody really understands. And no, thank you, that was really useful. Thank you also for the whole of the talk. It's been really interesting.
My pleasure.
Are there any more questions? Peter, in time. Well, thank you so much again, Mike, for your really interesting talk, and really thank you very much for getting up so early and joining us. And thank you to everyone for joining. This is our last session for this year, so I look forward to seeing everyone in 2021, and hopefully everyone has a restful Christmas period. So thank you very much for joining, and thanks again, Mike.
Yep, my pleasure.